Hello. Hi. Just give it a moment and see who joins us this morning. We are going to be talking about survival mode, how we support ourselves through it. I received some really great questions on just different ways this creeps up and how to handle it, how to really stay in the moment and not let all of the sort of logical tools that we understand, in that logical way, not go out the window when the situation is challenging or we get activated or triggered. Because this is one of the most common things where logically we understand something, but when the stress of the moment shows up, that integration doesn't show up for us, and we start going into our old ways, our old patterns, and we're just not there for ourselves. And so it's really about how to embody this and how to practice this again and again until it is fully integrated, which is a really powerful skill that will change our lives, not just with love, where it can feel really activated and high stakes, but really in any area of your life. I mean, I can't tell you how many women I know and clients that I've supported applying this at work, applying this with just difficult family members and those in their life that just really bring up this old sort of visceral trigger or pressure. So let's just kind of talk about survival mode in a really simple way first. There's the fight, right? When we start to get activated, we don't know how to separate the the truth that we're not actually a threat. We're not actually at risk. So that primitive part of our brain gets activated and is depending upon us to protect it. It doesn't have the ability to recognize this actually isn't required in this moment. We're not in the jungle fighting for resources in this moment. We don't have to use this right now. And it, depending upon our histories, the kind of work that we do, the kind of lifestyle that we live, all of this can get really intense to varying degrees based off of those factors and our own personal histories of trauma, of stress, of just different things that we've gone through in life. So we all have to support ourselves, but sort of the experience will be more visceral depending upon these factors. So we can go into, that fight response where we are fighting like our life depends upon it. Maybe we're, really aggressive. Maybe we are destructive. Maybe we get physical. That would be an extreme. The low level ways in which this can play out, maybe we start snapping, we're impatient, we just have that underlying agitation or sort of sarcasm or surliness to us that isn't necessary. And we don't realize that we're doing it because we're just in that mode of reacting versus really thinking about how we're showing up and why we're approaching something in this way. Like, where can we kind of soften those edges and recognize where we are in time and space, so this aspect of us isn't leading. So that would be the fight response. And then, of course, the flight would be feeling the instinct to run away and to, isolate, and to recognize that this can be really detrimental in relationship, because of course you are just running away from the problem, and it can take an unknown amount of time to bring the system back down, and the other person is left wondering, what's going on, and it doesn't allow us to grow because we are just trying to escape versus regulating in the moment and really discerning, does this actually require me to act on this instinct, or can I practice standing in this storm, or even stretching it further? Can I practice asking for what I need in this moment? Right. And if you're with a safe, like high quality partner, or if you're in a safe situation, this is such a beautiful way to practice and start to stretch yourself. Fight, flight, freeze is where we're kind of like a deer in headlights, where we just completely go numb and we have no idea kind of what's going on, that we've kind of shut down in an effort to protect ourselves. And this can be helpful in the sense where we do want to take a moment to figure out what our next move is, right? Like, that can be very beneficial, but it starts to get unhealthy when we've just like full on shut down and we're paralyzed with not knowing what to do next. And so this can kind of leave us very unconscious and feeling regret later, because then when we start thinking again, we begin to recognize all the ways in which we actually could have showed up for ourselves in that moment. And so this can lead to feelings of regret. And so ways to really recognize this are, maybe even just touching your arm, recognizing your surroundings, just bringing that sensation to your body, whether it be through breath or just sort of gentle awareness or squeezes or touches, where it's like, okay, I don't have to know what my next move is, but the more I recognize what I'm feeling, the more I can identify that and bring voice to it. So if it's in relationship, I'm feeling really flooded right now. I'm going to need to take a little time to feel my way through this, or I need a little, being able to ask for what you need. I need a little space to kind of sort through this. Being able to just bring enough awareness to it to give yourself the opportunity to think about it and make a really conscious decision, so that unconscious part of you isn't taking over to keep you safe. And then the less talked about one is the fawn response, right? Which is like the people pleaser, where we go into full-fledged people pleasing and we let that take over, where to the point where we can't separate the other person's emotional experience from our own. And this becomes something where we have to really bring in a lot of gentleness and compassion for ourselves, because this likely served us at one point in our life to keep us safe. And so this is a lot of the deeper inner child work, where we really want to hold space to, figure out what we're feeling and to connect to that and to create the safety for others to truly have their own emotional experience, for them to just, work it out, right? Let them be a grown man and work it out, and being able to recognize that, they can feel how they want to feel, but we don't have to take it on. We don't have to take responsibility and fix it, right? So I wrote a couple other things down that I wanted to share, because the more we're in survival mode, the less present we are and the less connected we are to our feminine energy, of course, because we are listening to make sure that we're safe. So when someone is communicating with us and talking, we tend to have a little bit more of a, I know this word is harsh, but more self-centered sort of perspective of things, because we're listening to see how it's going to impact us and how we're going to feel as a result of it. We don't feel as safe to just have this openness and this allowing, which is the essence of, feminine energy, where someone feels free to walk through the door or not. But we just allow, and we trust ourselves enough to feel what needs to be felt, versus kind of getting in there and trying to circumvent it because we're scared of feeling emotions of rejection, of abandonment. And so it's like this subtle way that we kind of sneak in there to control, but it allows us to really miss the present moment, because our energy is being used to try to figure out how to stay safe, right? And again, this can be at varying levels. And the more we're in an environment or a job or any of these things that are fast paced, and or if we're dealing with difficult people and we kind of got that armor on, the more aware we need to be when the day is done, to shed this and to practice supporting our bodies, so we can move into just that parasympathetic, balanced way of being, where there's nothing to do, nothing to protect, nothing to, fix. And we just allow ourselves to connect to being in our bodies and having that internal experience. And this is where we start to open up to receptivity. Let's see. I tend to run away because I'm worried I won't be able to keep my boundaries in front of them. Yeah, that's a really, really solid point, because this also is like a practice of that self trust, right? Where when we're flooded, we may not know what our boundary is in that moment. So it may be really hard to speak to it. Otherwise, yeah, you succumb to the guilt that they want, that they're kind of trying to manipulate you through, whether they realize it or not, because the other person's in survival mode. When we enter survival mode, we're manipulative. I mean, that's just the truth of it, because we are trying to get our needs met, like our life depends on it. So we go into control tactics, fear tactics, and manipulation. And so I think that the best way to handle that is to let the other person know that the conversation isn't feeling good, and you need a little time to process, but you don't succumb to taking on their emotional experience, because the more we take action from dysfunction, the more dysfunction we create, right? So the more we're letting guilt lead, the more we feel guilt, the more manipulated we are, the more easily we're manipulated, right? So we want to be able to recognize that tendency within us and just create time and space between it, so we can let the other person know that now's not the time, or I need a little time to kind of sit with this. Don't be afraid to not know the answer in that moment and speak to it. I don't want to make a decision I regret or feel resentful about later. I need to take a little time and really feel my way through this, right? And if they push, which keep in mind, the masculine men generally push boundaries, and we have to hold the line. We have to be able to know, I can't. That doesn't feel good to me. That doesn't feel right for me. Thank you so much. I have to decline. And even if we have to say it again and again and again, it's really powerful to be able to hold the line for ourselves in that way. I even notice it with like my youngest son. He is such a boundary pusher. I don't know where he learned it. It's like something innate within him where he wants to try to stretch me as far as he can. And I just have to keep saying, no, no, that doesn't work for me. And I've said this before, but it's really something interesting to note with boundaries. You'll notice that most men have no problem communicating their boundaries very clearly to you. That won't work for me. I don't like that. They have no problem. And it's like, okay, we just sort of, but for most of the feminine and women generally, it's a lot harder. And so we're kind of taught culturally to just go along and to override what feels right for us. And so it's really about now holding space for yourself in the room and approaching this from a position of what feels right for me. How do I quiet all the noise and connect to what ultimately is going to allow me to feel like I can be the highest quality version of myself? And if we're doing things out of guilt or resentment, we cannot be of that quality. And then it doesn't feel good for anyone. And so you're really, really serving yourself as well as others best by making the way you feel a priority. Even though we've been taught that this is selfish, it is not selfish. It's really the most gentle and loving thing you can do, because you're being authentic and you're being true to you, and you're not pacifying someone's ego, right? That's we can't see who someone really is if we are constantly pacifying their ego, afraid of rocking the boat, right? We're too scared to have them feel strong emotions and work through them. So we try to make sure that doesn't happen, so they still love us or they still come towards us. Whereas really, if we're having to do that at the expense of ourselves, they're not inspired to stretch and grow. And we'll never know if they can really love us and accept us for who we are. And so this is about that dismantling of some of those egoic tendencies where we show them and we live in truth, right? Where we allow them to see who we really are, and we speak to that and trust ourselves enough to know that that will always be honored and respected by the people that are meant to be in our life, right? Let's see. Okay, so I got a lot of really, really lovely questions on this, but one that kind of speaks to this, and type anything in the chat too. Let's see. Okay, so how do you not let everything you learned fly out the window? I think I spoke to that, right? That's about even wearing a reminder, taking a pause, making sure that you're in your side of the lane and that you're centering and connecting to what feels authentic and true for you, not feeling like you have to quickly react or speak right away. This will give you a chance to automate and up level, so you're being true to yourself versus kind of going into your old default tendencies that you used most likely as a child to feel a sense of safety or be pleasing to others and to get love, essentially, right? The other question was around like a stress to be married. Like culturally, they're feeling a lot of survival instincts come up around needing to be married. So how do you not let everything you learned, and everything? How do you let this sort of not lead, and you decide for yourself your worth, so these instincts don't take over and you feel like you're not good enough because you're not where others have decided that you should be? This is a lot of conditioning in a situation like this, and so you want to quiet that external noise, and you want to connect to the truth that you are worthy and you are valid no matter what. Like if you're married, if you're single, and I know that this is going to vary culturally from person to person, but you are worthy, and making sure that you approach your life from that standpoint, that there is nothing externally that is going to make you say, okay, I've arrived, right? That is an internal process, because that can be such an illusion that we chase, where we think, okay, once I have this, then I'll feel safe, then I'll feel happy. But then it's suddenly, oh, now I need a house, then I'll feel safe, then I feel happy. Oh, okay, but now I need, the kids or the dog or the fence or whatever it is, then I'll be happy. And we keep chasing something outside of ourselves, then rather than just doing the inner work of being so courageous and bold and embracing who we are right now. Because if it was just about like getting married in this situation, I don't know the circumstances of this person, but I would guess that most likely, if all it was about was getting married, you could have that, right? You could go do that tomorrow, but it's not about that. You love yourself too much to just enter any situation. You want it to be right, and you want it to be all of those high quality experiences that are possible for you. Otherwise, you probably would have just, go do it if it were just that thing alone. So really connect to the fact that you have a choice and you're making choices, and that you're not a victim to your circumstances, and that you're holding and operating under a lot more power and agency than you may believe in those moments where some of this fear and some of that messaging of not being good enough kicks in, because we're inundated with that, right? We have to really be able to recognize that, where it's like, oh, until we buy this, we're not pretty enough, or oh, until we have all of these things, then our life isn't full enough. And we've got to really be able to turn inward and recognize that that's not it, and that we get to decide and connect to that personal agency again and again and again. And that takes a lot of courage, right? It is so easy to just try to check all the boxes and say, okay, like now am I good enough? But you'll find that if you do it this way, there will always be an emptiness that leads you kind of chasing your tail. Let's see. What is the best way to gain his true advocacy and understanding how I need more freedom to pursue my passions and our relationship, to show up as my best self? Um, well, I don't know if you need to like gain his buy-in, right? I think that It's more about, being able to express what you need and sharing that from a heartfelt space, and being able to let him know that his support would mean the world, or it would feel so good to know that, you're on the same page with these things. Or I think that as a general rule, it's really helpful to express the desire, how that would make you feel. And if it applies to what you're asking for, asking, I would love to hear your thoughts on it, or, what do you think? And gaining his perspective. But the important thing that I've shared with many of you before, and I'm sure I've touched on it as videos, when we're expressing a desire, it's really important that we're not attached to the outcome, right? Because if we're attached to the outcome, we're going to be micromanaging that desire, and he's not going to feel safe or free, right? So we have to be able to express it and then let it go, and be perfectly willing then to go meet that need ourselves, or just to go off and do our own thing. But we don't need to get his buy-in or permission to do what's authentic for us. We do have to be respectful and kind, and be considerate, and all of those types of things, but we don't want to sort of ask permission to be ourselves. And if we're in relationship, I think it is about kind of finding that compromise and that balance. So you're being respectful to his desires and his needs, but you're also making sure that you're not doing that at an expense of your own. And so I think that, let me know if there's more questions to this, if I'm answering that correctly. How do you know when you're with a good quality man? What does it feel like to feel safe and secure in a relationship with him? Does it bring out the best in you versus exacerbate any inner attachment wounds you were healing? For example, the anxious attachment wound. I think that relationships will bring out all aspects of us. But if you find that you are on a constant roller coaster ride, meaning that that anxious attachment is always active the majority of the time, I don't think that it should feel that way, right? And it depends upon what's getting activated in us versus what we're witnessing in our partner, because maybe we just haven't learned how to feel safe in relationship. And even if the man or the masculine is showing up so powerfully, we're still like, oh, I still feel anxious, then that would be a strong indicator of your work. But if he is, sort of showing up and there is this sort of dance, there will be those ebbs and flows. But I think the way to heal this is being honest and recognizing that it's yours to own, that it's your work. And I've shared this example before, but I think that, I've had to find what triggers my anxious attachment, and it's usually like the abandonment wound. That's the biggest sort of factor in it. But being able to express, to my partner, something just gets activated in me that doesn't make any sense. And this was around him like saying he needed space, like, because I never knew what that meant. Does that mean like a day? Does that mean like a month? It was always like really hard for me to hear that, because it activated that abandonment wound. And so I learned how to express that and say, this is something that brings up a lot of stuff for me, and it's mine to deal with. I'm not asking you to do anything differently, yet I also want to be really vulnerable about what my emotional experience is when that's spoken. And then he met me halfway. It's like, okay, he heard it, and he did make some modifications and adjustments, which then helped me lean into more full self-expression, more vulnerability, and create more safety to step forward with more and more, authenticity. And so that's kind of the dance. Whereas if the partner will said, too bad, this is who I am, it's like, okay, well, that's good information. That's good information that you want to watch over time, because if you're with someone who is completely unwilling to look at themselves and do the work, it's probably not going to be a good fit, because relationships and love is about supporting each other and helping regulate each other's nervous systems, not sending each other on these wild rides. That's not sustainable over time. But some people have equated that with excitement and love, and consider, love after that honeymoon phase is, it can still be passionate, intimate, and beautiful, but it's more steady, it's more grounded, it's more stable, right? It creates safety. It creates expansiveness. It creates a more full self expression of who you are. And then the more you can express who you really are and have that met with love, the more and more you grow and integrate into your own, because you are in a situation that supports you being the truest version of yourself. And so you don't start modifying in those old sort of ways where you're trying to figure out who you need to be to get love, right? Let me know if that answers the question, because I have a few more related to it. I have a big heart and I have lots of love to give. How can I approach dating in a way that will protect me from potential heartbreak and have boundaries? I think this is about recognizing that we can't open the floodgates all at once, right? We have to pace ourselves. And so it's not about muting or hiding who you are, but this is true for those of you in a relationship or who are married. We can't throw everything out at once. We have to be able to recognize that the feminine energy is about timing. And if we are sort of opening those floodgates, we can overwhelm another person and they're not able to receive us and hear us and connect to us, because it's just become this like overstimulating experience. And so less is more, right? A lot of it is about teaching ourselves patience and trusting that just because we have something to say doesn't mean we need to say it in that moment, that we can sit on it, that we can wait and teach ourselves that discipline and let it evolve and grow over time. We want that slow and steady pace in relationship. Fast and furious tends to die out quickly as a general rule. And so, even if we are really, really excited and we feel that attraction and that draw, we still want to have that slow and steady pace. And this takes a lot of self-discipline. This takes a lot of mindset work to recognize that we can't miss what's meant to be ours, that we do not have to take action out of scarcity, and that we are worth the wait, and that this is the way to build, so we don't just feel like the rug's been pulled out from underneath us and we're on this roller coaster ride, not really knowing where it's leading us before that trust and safety have been established, and before we know that the other person wants the same things as us and wants them in sort of the time frame in which we want them, right? So often we jump into something and we don't know what they want until way later, and we realize that now we're really attached and our goals and our dreams don't align. And now what do we do? Maybe we can enjoy the emotion without having to put it out there. And this is a good point, because it's like that delayed gratification where sometimes if I'm coaching a woman and she recognizes that maybe she's made some mistakes and could have gone about things differently, I'll often hear, can I fix it right now? Because it's like she just wants to check that box and get it off. And this is kind of similar to what I'm talking about, where it's like, no, over time you're going to show this through your actions versus feeling like you got to explain it, right? You're going to let it all unfold, and you're going to sink into that discomfort around setting a new pace for yourself and a new rhythm, and letting your communication be through more of how you show up and through your modeling versus needing to explain to someone how you like things, how you want things, where they might be not supporting you. And he can't hear this. He doesn't feel inspired. But when you just are taking care of yourself and honoring yourself and demonstrating through your actions, now you're conveying this in a way in which he can hear. And this is very, very powerful and inspiring to the masculine, right? Because now he's experiencing you and feeling your boundaries or what you need or what's important to you at a gut level. And it also shows that you really value yourself because you're not going to get lost in his world, his preferences, his pace, but you're going to hold space for yourself. And this naturally is setting boundaries, and it's naturally teaching someone how to treat you, right? Okay. Can you elaborate on when you say there are no mistakes with the right man? Can you truly just be? In the same regard, can you also try to do everything right and still not be enough for the wrong man? What do I do with men who don't see my value? This is another one that takes courage, where we do not let others' rejection lead to rejection of self, right? Where we don't decide just because they don't like us or they don't want to be with us that that must be who we are. We must not be good enough. We must also reject who we are, right? We need to be fixed. We're broken. We aren't good enough. And so then we start to take on what another person believes true about us. Whereas you'll recognize when you hold space for yourself and you decide your value, regardless of whether he accepts or rejects you, this is when one starts to question, their initial sort of decision around something like, oh, because when we hold space and love ourselves, it's like, okay, well, did I make a mistake here? But when we just say, oh, he must know, I must not be those things, well, then, it's affirmed, right, in his mind. And so it's very, very necessary to make sure that we hold this emotional space for ourselves and we never let someone else's opinion or determination of us, dictate our value. Like, we just don't. We hold steady to who we are. Like, you don't want to be with me? Okay. I don't want to be with anyone that doesn't want to be with me either. So that's great that I know that, right? And so if this is applying to a breakup or something, you're not trying to talk him into all the reasons he should be there, or all the reasons that you're good enough, or he should try, or give it all those sort of pull at the pants leg knee jerk reactions. But instead, you're expressing what you want. I don't want this, yet I respect your decision. And at the end of the day, I really don't want to be with anyone that doesn't want to be with me, right? And I think, to the second point of this question, the more we're trying to do everything right, the more we're kind of heady, right? And the more we're not being our authentic self. Have you ever noticed that when you just don't care, like if the guy likes you or not, or if he's into you or interested, you're just acting like yourself and you're just being who you are with your friends, with your family, with those that love you the most, and you're just magnetizing his attraction more and more and more. But then when it's around someone where you are just like, oh wow, I can't mess this one up, then you start to get heady, and they lose that ability to connect to you because that connection is disrupted and blocked by this headiness. So they can't feel your essence, they can't feel who you are. And so it's really important to have those practices where dropping down into the body, you're noticing what's going on, and if the ego's activated, and bringing yourself back down to the moment and connecting to your inherent worth, reminding yourself of that in the moment, putting practices in place so you are not inflating someone and then as a result diminishing yourself. recognizing when your investment level is way, way higher than theirs, and self-adjusting by filling up your life. If you're dating, by dating other people. If you're married or in relationship, by expanding your world, by focusing on the one person you have control over, but not letting yourself live in this state of waiting or hoping to be chosen, right? So many young women that I come across do that, forgetting that they have a choice too. It's not about just you being chosen by whoever it is that you think is so amazing, but remembering that you've got a choice too, that they're not the only ones making a decision here. And you're really remembering your value and what you bring to the table. So you're approaching love in this balanced way versus kind of that damsel in distress, hoping to be rescued from your life and putting that happiness once again outside of yourself, because to the masculine, this feels like tremendous pressure and expectation. And he no longer feels free to give to you in the way that he would if you already had this sort of fulfilled life. And then he gets to kind of swoop in and contribute to it in just this really beautiful way that allow that hero's instinct to come out and some of his most beautiful gifts that live within him to shine. That's when the masculine, you draw out the absolute best components, when you're not needing it for a sense of okayness, but he can just contribute to an already content woman's life and feel that freedom to do so. This is where you draw out the most beautiful components of him. And so there is that mindset and inner work piece that is so important, right? Less about the external, more about building that confidence from the inside out, right? You can, of course, feel beautiful and do all of those things to feel attractive and good around the masculine, but ultimately, confidence is built from the inside out by slowing down enough to recognize what instincts are taking over, where you can truly begin to show up authentically, not edit yourself, no performative components, no embellishment, no exaggeration, but connecting to the truth of who you are and letting that slowly make its way out until it's integrated and embodied, right? So that was it. I think I wanted to go 30 minutes. I'm going about 40. If there's anything else that you would love to hear more about, or if I've kind of sparked something, please just leave me a comment. I'll post this when it's done processing, or just email at jen@jenmichellecoaching.com and let me know your questions, because we'll do this again and I will save them and we will talk again soon. So thank you all for being here, and lovely seeing you all today. Bye.